Hi folks, if you found your way here it's because you own a Bedford and your Bedford brakes probably aren't working. What we're going to do in this video is pull the front wheel off a Bedford bus NFM series or SB3 1976 with the sole purpose of getting to the wheel brake cylinder, which would normally sit here because generally that's the bit that garks up and pits and needs rebuilding. So without further ado, we'll get stuck into it. And just to make everyone aware, there's actually going to be 3 parts to this video series. This is the first part, getting to the wheel cylinder and how you get it all apart. Second part to this video series is the wheel brake cylinder itself, stripping it down, having a look at it, inspecting it, getting it rebuilt or stainless steel sleeved. And the third and final part is reassembling it all. And what we've got here is the hub and the drum. Heavy sucker, you have to lift this back on. Never mind, into it. So the first thing you want to do is loosen off your wheel nuts while the wheel is still resting on the ground. Now you've got to remember that heavy vehicles have left and right handed threads depending on the side of the vehicle you're on. So we're on the right hand side of the vehicle, so to undo the nuts you have to go anti-clockwise, but if we're on the left hand side of the vehicle, to undo the nuts you have to go clockwise. You're going to struggle using a short ass little tyre iron like that to undo the wheel nuts on this. It's just not going to work. So that's why we have this big bit of square. I think it's about 30 by 30. And what you do, extend your power bar out to about 3 feet so you can get anything undone at that point. Now that you've got your wheel nuts loose, you want to jack it up. But what you want is a bunch of these wooden blocks. Go down and buy some big sleepers. These are 200 by 100 by about 400 millimeters long, and you'll use those to stack and jack your vehicle. But before you get too carried away, make sure you stick some wooden blocks underneath the back wheels, because you don't want that sucker rolling away. Because hidden down next to the driver's seat is that thing called a handbrake, and on a Bedford they don't always work that well. So I've gone and jacked this up in slightly the wrong order. I should have left both wheels on because currently I've got one off. So as you jack it up, got our jack there, use your big blocks to hold it together, and we're going to get it up a bit and slide that one in there and let it down, and then we can take that wheel off. But just be warned, you've got 2 leaf springs there and they're very rigid, so you can be jacking on this side and lift this up and you get the wheel off the ground, and then all of a sudden she lifts off the blocks over there and goes for a whoopsie to the left or the right. So be bloody careful. Nearly there. Oops, close. One more as the jack disappears into the driveway. Done. We'll rest her there. It's wheel nut time. There you have it, we've got our wheel off. Feels pretty smooth. So what we'll do is we'll start getting this all apart. But while we're here, we'll just have a wee look around. Turn on the light. So we're on the driver's side at the moment, so you probably recognise a few bits in here, but that's your air foot valve for the brakes, which lead up to all your brake levers up there. And then you've got your clutch lever over the other side, looking into the side of the motor. Now, what comes down this pipe is hydraulic fluid, because this is air over hydraulic. So air on the foot brake, back to the master cylinder down there, and then the master cylinder goes on to a hydraulic master cylinder, which gives us all our hydraulic fluid pushed up here, down the hose, and into, if I can see, There we go, put on glasses. The back of the wheel cylinder, so it comes in here. Now you've got your bleed valve here for bleeding your brakes, and then you've got your brake adjusters. You've got your rear brake shoe adjuster, and you've got your front brake shoe adjuster. So we'll release the brake shoes a little bit to make the hub slide off. I'm cheating a little bit, but I've got a driver here. I'm going to go onto the back one here. Just loosen that off a little bit. I've done the front one already, and that'll allow the hub to spin free of the brake shoes, or the brake drum to not hang up when we slide the hub off. And to make it a little bit more sensical, if there is such a word for you guys out there, these are the two adjusting screws, and to anti-clockwise to release the shoes off the drum. What we're going to do now is undo the wheel bearing cap, and I've got the Neanderthal way of doing it, a set of Stiltsons. That's the way. So that'll release the bearing protection cap. And then behind here is your wheel bearing nut, lock nut, and little washer. So go through and clean out the grease around your wheel bearing. It just makes it a bit easier getting to the castle nut. Make sure you keep this ultra clean. Don't get any rubbish in here whatsoever, because you'll just wreck your bearings. Now what we're going to do is take out the split pin through here. There you go, split pin. You have to get a new one of those because half of it's broken off. This bearing is used, and it'll have a set amount of preload on it, which means this is done up so the nut is reasonably firm. But what you want to do is actually establish how firm that has been done up, because you want to repeat or put it back the same way it came apart. So if we just put the spanner on it and undo it and then do it up, I can figure out the position where it's going to land, where the pin goes through, and how much tension it's under. And you want to remember that, because when you go to put it back together, it'll make things a lot easier. So we'll take that nut off. And put it somewhere safe. Just an observation here, our split pin can go through here, but I suspect it's also a hole down through here. So that gives you the ability to adjust the amount of tension on that nut, because you can put split pin down through there or through the side, if that makes sense. Now in the back here, there is a big washer. You see, as I took that out, the hub dropped down, and the bearings coming out with it, which is good. We'll take that with us. So there you go, here's your bearing. And put that somewhere safe. And there's two parts there. That's your big washer with the key in the top, stop the washer rotating, and that's your wheel bearing. I'm about to lift this hub off, but just for instance, if the wheel bearing is still stuck in there, put the cap back on, because as you lift off this hub, the wheel bearing is likely to fall out and land on the ground, but this hub will catch it and keep it in there so it doesn't get all dirty. So we're going to lift the hub off now, put the wheel nuts back on, because it protects the studs. Got a big block of wood there, which means I can rest the underside of the hub on there as I lift it off. So now you've got to wrestle this bugger, and it should come off because we've wound the brake shoes off so they won't get hung up on the inside. there you go, that's just resting there. We'll drop that down onto the ground. And in here, it's a little bit tricky to see, but there's a hub seal which we'll replace because it will probably be quite worn, and this is the inner bearing. So we have some success. We've got the hub and brake drum off now. We can see the wheel cylinder that we need to remove and get rebuilt. Now this is the axle, and this is where the outer bearing would rest, and this is where the inner bearing would rest. Also, there's the hub seal, which sits in the back here and runs on this edge, and that seals and stops all the grease getting out of the hub into the wheel drum. Now there's this cap here, which is like a dish, and that directs, so if your seal goes in the back here, your hub seal goes, the oil and grease comes out here, dribbles down here, then can get out of the hub. I'll show you the other part of that now. So we're looking at the inside of the hub now. So if you have the grease gets out of here or the seal goes, you don't want this getting onto your brake shoes. So that's that dish I was talking about, and that dish actually tucks in the underside of this little dish here. And if we have a look around in here, there's some drain holes somewhere. Some little oil drain holes. There's one up there. So up in there, there's a little hole, and that hole leads through to the outside of the hub. So we're on the outside of the hub where the wheel bolts on. If we have a look in between the hub and the drum, there is a little hole in there. You have to believe me, you see the little damp patch in there, and that's where there's 4 of those. There's one about there, 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 and there, and that allows the grease to escape out of here, or if it's leaking from the seal, to stop it getting into the brakes, and allows it to leak out here. And that's an indication for you, because it'll be flaring out across the drum, that you've got a hub seal that's gone. So as I was saying, that's your hub seal, and this is one that's been pulled out. All it is just a rubber seal that seals up against that surface on the axle I was showing you before. Now this is the old style. When we get a new one, it'll look something like that, and the new one, the ones I use generally have a twin lip, so there's an outer dust lip, which is that surface there, and then there's the main grease or oil seal that sits on the inside, and that gets hammered back in there. So I've already taken one out of here. You can see the bearing surface in there. They all look good. So what we'll do with these is I'll clean the bearings, repack them, put new hub seals in there, and we'll put them back into service. Oh, and a critical bit of information. So the size of this is, the inside diameter of the hub seal is 3 3/8, and the outside distance from there to there of the replacement part will be 4 inches and 5/8. So next step is we're going to start to disassemble the brake cylinder out of there, but just before that we do that, I'll just give you a quick run around what's actually happening in here. So as I was saying before, brake fluid comes down the pipe into this cylinder here, and there's 2 pistons in here, one either side, and it pushes them out, and by doing so it pushes on these shafts or pins on either side and pushes the brake shoes out onto the hub or drum, brake drum. That slows you down. Now there are 2 springs here which pull everything back in, and then down the bottom we have a series of pivot points, and these allow the shoes to self-align within the hub when you reassemble it. So the shoes can move up or down and in and out to some degree to allow them to sit evenly on all the flat surfaces within the hub. So the pivot points are here and here, and these ones have like a set, there's a little bracket in here which gives a certain amount of drag to them, so they just don't flop around. So essentially that's all it is. Pretty straightforward bit of kit. Now the brake linings. The brake lining on the front is always thicker than the brake lining on the back, and this is from new. So when I look in here, I know that these brake linings are virtually new because of the thickness of this There's a reasonable amount of brake lining on there, and the back brake lining is about half the amount of thickness on there. Don't panic, that one's not actually worn, that's just the way they come. About half the material on the rear one, twice the amount on the front one, and they're actually held in place by rivets. I think they're like copper rivets. You can't see them, but there's a series of rivets in here, and they're pinned over on the back like that. So what you can do is you can get these relined when they eventually wear out. We'll get the brake cylinder out now, but the first thing you want to do is come up around the back here. So this is your brake hose. I've just given this a squirt with CRC. You've got a flared fitting here. It's got your hydraulic or brake fluid in there, and what we want to do is disconnect that. So you need one of these flare nut spanner. If you're just using a normal spanner, you're wasting your time because you're likely to damage it, but this actually grabs on all sides apart from one, as you can see. Really important to use one of these. And to stop it spinning, we'll put an 18 on the outside of the brake fitting, and then we can use the flare nut fitting around the back there, and we can disconnect those now. Now the problem is, as soon as I disconnect that pipe, all the brake fluid's going to leak out, so what I'm going to do is wedge this bit of hose up here, up the middle of the pipe, to stop it leaking out. So, bit of rubber pipe, take a cable tie, and what we're going to do is bend the end over to actually block it because it's got a hole in the pipe. So now we can wedge this bit in the pipe and it will stop the master reservoir leaking out everywhere. So this loosened off pretty well, but what you're going to do is undo that using your flare nut spanner. See how that's leaking now? We'll use this in the end here to stop it leaking, emptying the entire of the master brake fluid cylinder everywhere. What we're going to do is just push it in the end there, and don't ask me what size this is, it just fits. There we go. Just makes it easier later when I go to bleed the brakes. Less chance of having to or deal with air pockets in the brakes. So there you go. So now what we're going to do is, there's a little nut around the back here. I think that's 19. Yep. So we'll undo that and drop this hose off. Put that on, that way we won't lose it. Keep the rubbish out of there. Now I disconnected that guy first from up there because you can disconnect it there, but there's not much room to get your spanners in there, and I'm going to leave this on even when I pull the cylinder out, because that hose will just feed through the back of the pan on the back here. And we'll disconnect the hose later in the garage, much easier that way. Now we want to take the tension off these springs because we need to remove them, and they're tight at the moment, and that's because there are threads in here which are on the brake adjusters. So we actually want to wind these in so these pins actually draw in. That way it'll take the tension off those springs and we can remove them a bit easier. So we'll cheat with our impact driver. That's one done. I should clean the crap off those before I get too carried away. There we go. Let's just taken the tension off those springs, so they should, in theory, I can go in a little bit further. Come off a little bit easier. Move the camera, it's in the way, but you get the idea. Don't want to get your fingers in there. Now that we've got those springs off, where's my hammer? What we want to do is move those brake shoes out a bit. There. And there. And they're nice and free, so they should work nicely. So what we're going to do now is focus on unbolting the brake cylinder, and we have to do that from the other side. There's two bolts which release this, one there and one there, and we're working with a 9/16 socket. I suspect someone's been here before because that came apart very easily. So that's your top bolt out. And I forgot, after you've got those two nuts out, or bolts, you need to take out the bleed nipple as well, because it's not going to pass through the housing if you don't do that. Now these don't need to be done up super tight. Where are we in frame? There we go. So that's your bleed nipple there. Take that out. And then all of that should just pass through. Should be able to pull all that through here. So now we've got all the bolts undone from the back. That should be loose enough. You may have to tap it a bit to get it out. Should, in theory, be able to walk this out like that, and then drag the hose through with it. So this is what we want to get out, this assembly here, brake cylinder. And that's your assembly. Now, in my next video, we'll strip this down. At this point you can choose, just take the whole thing to a brake rebuilder and they'll put new seals in it, stainless steel, sleeve it, and give it back to you as a complete assembly, which you can then reinstall. But in the next video we'll strip this down and investigate what's going on in there. As I said, the next video we'll go through and pull all this apart and actually have a look inside there. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you later.